So we're just going to begin with Katharine Morling's artist biography. Katharine Morling is a UK-born ceramic artist, best known for her life-size, black and white sculptures full of quirky graphic details of domestic objects such as tables, chairs, ladders, and lockers. Morling describes her work as three-dimensional drawings. Each piece is embedded with emotion and stories to represent her inner searching, trusting the medium of clay to communicate these themes to her audience. Now we'll be taking a closer look at the themes and ideas encapsulated in her work. Morling describes her work as being driven by and inspired by her own personal narrative. The starting point for each piece is entirely personal. Building from this standpoint of inspiration, Morling builds on themes of the memory, which can be truly seen in her A Stitch in Time artwork. For Morling, this piece evokes memories of her childhood creativity by allowing her to look back on the time that she turned a discarded wicker basket into her own personal sewing case. Katharine Morling is also inspired by and includes themes of travel within her work, working in multiple studios around the world, including countries such as America, Switzerland, Hong Kong, China, and India. When working with these themes, Morling often references things that she saw or did throughout her travels. It is evident within works such as Camera, where the camera has become a clear symbol to represent the theme of travel within her artwork. Now we're going to be looking at art movements that inspired Morling's work. Morling's work is closely linked to and inspired by the pop art movement. Pop art is an art movement that emerged in Britain and the USA during the mid to late 1950s. The movement presented a challenge to traditions of fine art by including imagery from popular and mass culture, such as advertising, comic books, and mundane everyday objects. Pop artists began to look for inspiration in the world around them, representing and at times making art directly from everyday items, consumer goods, and mass media. Pop artists favoured realism, in marked contrast with the highly expressive, large-scale works of the abstract expressionists that came before them. They did this in a straightforward manner, using bold swaths of primary colours, often straight from the can or tube of paint. An example of how pop artists use the technique of sculpting particularly can be seen in Claes Oldenburg's work. He was an American sculptor best known for his public art installations, typically featuring large replicas of everyday objects. So now discussing the purpose of Morling's work. She describes it as being able to create multi-leveled artworks that allow the viewer to explore their own memories, evoking highly personal responses. The purpose behind using ceramics as a medium is that her drawings can now be seen in a 360 view, inviting the viewer to walk around the object and step into the mind of the artist. Morling's subject matter generally contains domestic or inanimate objects, including tables, chairs, ladders, lockers, kitchenware, tools, household items, and furniture or cameras, just to name a few. So now we focus on how art elements and principles are used in her work. Starting with elements, she uses line for drawing on the sculptures, texture, where she uses texture to support the form, making it memorable and relatable. She also uses shape as construction tool to build domestic objects, and she uses form to bring her three-dimensional objects to life. Now just looking at the principles that she uses, one could be scale, where she plays with scale to emphasize meaning and focus, proportion, to create realistic representations of her objects, and lastly contrast, where she uses the contrast of bold black lines against stark white porcelain to highlight the drawn form. So now we're going to take an in-depth look at Katharine Morling's artist process. Things generally begin with some quick drawings based on feelings and experiences to get a raft of ideas down on paper before a couple are selected for further development. More detailed drawings follow until one grabs Morling's imagination sufficiently to warrant the next stage. The highly stylized sketches are then translated into 3D objects. The nature of her subject matter makes Morling's ceramic construction tricky, so Morling researches the shapes carefully, planning the internal structure and temporary external supports needed. From there on in, it's clay and a couple of simple tools. The work is intricate and time consuming, so Morling has 3 assistants that work alongside her during construction. It is necessary to consider the inner structure of seemingly solid pieces, and she must allow for long drying periods, often over several months, to avoid cracking when fired. When ready, the work is then fired to the temperature of 1000 degrees. Next, the black lines are painted on, then the piece is finally refired at 1260 degrees Celsius. The unglazed porcelain has a matte and fragile quality that is said to be reminiscent of icing sheets or pieces of paper, rather than clay.